Hello and welcome back. You're watching Around the House. I'm your host, Steve O'Brien, and our show is about home improvement, home repair, and we have guests on. We do on-site work. If you've watched our show in the past, you've seen some of our episodes, and we touch on a number of different topics. We try to keep it interesting. We find different professionals in the business, and we follow them around, or we'll have them in the studio, and we'll get some good information. So I hope you can stay with us for this show. We actually have quite a bit to talk about on this show. And if you watched one of our other shows, we had a chimney gentleman on, Kyle Callahan, and he pretty much was a specialist with inserts and wood stoves and things of that nature. And in today's show, we have a gentleman in here I'd like to introduce, Mr. Scott Sarras. Scott?
How you doing, Steve?
Thanks for coming in.
Nice to see you.
Scott is one of the owners of South Shore Fireplace and owner of Chimney Chap. Why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about your company and how long you guys have been established and things like that, so they get an idea of who you are.
Okay. Well, I'm actually second generation chimney sweep. Chimney Chap has been a family-owned, operated business for the last 35 years. We are located at 1127 Main Street in Hanson, along with South Shore Fireplace. Like I said, I'm second generation. We are a full-service chimney company. From cleanings to liner installs. I mean, we do repointing, new construction, old construction. We build chimneys from scratch. We change the facade of fireplaces. Anything that you want that has to do with a fireplace, that's what we do.
Interesting, because I have never had a mason. You're a mason, right? You do masonry. You do all the brickwork and the block work and things that have to be done to make the structure of the chimney or the inside of the fireplace. You know all the details you need to know for the openings and sizes and things like that. So I've got a few questions right off the bat. While I have them up here, I want to throw them at you. And I've seen a lot in my business. I've seen a lot of good, a lot of bad. I actually worked with masons when I was a young fella, and we actually built the chimney. And I remember, and again, I hope it wasn't the wrong way to do it, but he was an old-time brick mason, and I was pretty much his, what they call, tender. I'd bring his bricks up with the brick tongs and pull them up on a well wheel and temper his mortar. It was hard work, and at a young age I knew I didn't want to do that for a living because it was just hard work, and I applaud you for still doing that. What he did was he used brick ties, and he'd screw them into the side of the house as he was going up with the chimney. And you know, the brick ties would actually tie the bricks to the house. And then at the top, obviously, he would flash it. They call it step flashing, where it meets the roof. But I've seen houses where you could actually see the chimney coming away from the house.
Detaching.
What's the reason for that? Is the water getting behind there because they didn't flash it right and the ties rotted away, or is it they never put the ties in? What would be the fix of something like that?
Well, there's two reasons for that happening, and we've noticed it a lot in the South Shore area. Number one, a lot of builders, when they were building these chimneys, believe it or not, did not even use wall ties. They would just build the masonry chimney, completely avoiding them. Secondary, a lot of builders that were using them were using nails to nail it in. As you can tell, you can't use a nail to put a wall tie in because it's straight. It will pull out eventually. You have to use a threaded screw in order to screw it into the house.
That would make sense.
And at that time, you won't have future detachment of the chimney. In order to fix that, unfortunately, and fix it right, you would have to tear it down. You can't. Some companies say, well, let's just strap it and brace it.
I've seen people strap it, and it doesn't seem.
No, you have to understand, a chimney weighs, given anywhere from 2 to 4 tons. When that chimney starts leaning, that 2-inch strap that you have bolted into the side of your house, the only thing that's going to do is rip that side of the house along with the chimney coming down.
But what would cause a chimney, if it was built plumb and straight, to actually start to lean unless something shifted? Maybe this foundation settled or something?
I mean, we live in New England. We have freezing periods and summer periods, weather changes. You doing new construction inside the house where you're altering rooms or changing rooms, putting different stresses on different parts of the house.
Yeah.
It's going to cause that chimney to shift a little bit. In doing so, it will give you that potential of it starting to detach if it's not tied in.
Well, not only that, I mean, when something moves like that, you know, and I know how your basic construction is, even in old houses where they didn't use flues way back when any kind of movement, and you're gonna lose that integrity of any masonry between the bricks or the flues. So now you're creating a point where the flame or the heat can get through that and potentially start a fire.
That's correct. I mean, especially if you have a fireplace and your heating flue vents in, your heating system, if it vents in the same chimney, usually the flue tiles are sitting directly next to each other.
Right.
Now in doing so, if the chimney shifted or detached a little bit, the smoke chamber could be exposed. The masonry inside the smoke chamber might have cracked. In doing so, you might be getting some of those fumes coming up from the heating unit directly into your fireplace smoke chamber, which eventually is leaking into your living area.
Oh, that's interesting. So all the more reason to have a carbon monoxide detector in that area.
Correct.
So you'd know right away if there was some kind of a leak going on before it was too late.
Correct.
That's interesting. So you guys, you actually build the chimney. You can restore a chimney from start to finish, brand new from the ground.
Yes, sir.
Now, Scott was talking to me earlier about you guys can actually, on the inside of a house, you can redesign a fireplace. You can make it change with the existing fireplace.
That's true.
Explain that a little bit, Scott. How would you go about, say, I had the old style, you know, raised hearth with slate and Cape Cod brick, which has a white in it, I believe, black and white little throughout it. And to me, it's a little bit busy to the eye. I wouldn't want to see that inside, maybe outside. But how would you recommend to somebody to correct something like that?
Well, it's not about correcting it. It's all about the homeowner's taste. I mean, we can come in, if you don't like the regular traditional Cape type fireplace facade, we can take the bricks out, remove the hearth completely out of the way. Then, depending on what you choose as a stone for the hearth, whether it's bluestone, limestone, I personally have brownstone because I love the texture and the look of the brownstone. And then, depending on what stone you want, whether it's a veneer or a natural stone, we can build the facade up all the way up to the ceiling if you want, or to where the traditional chimney was beforehand, the fireplace was, put a nice mantle on it, and give it that extra oomph that you wanted at your home.
Wow.
Because the fireplace is the center of attention always.
It is. And I know in my house, mine goes all the way to the ceiling. I've got not a cathedral, a vaulted ceiling in the front. And I remember when we were building the house, we wanted the look of the brick all the way up. And we came out, well, how far out is a brick and a half?
A brick and a half, you're looking about 6 inches.
Yeah, we're out about that.
Oh, no, a brick and a half, I'm sorry. That's
8 plus...
8, 4, 12, about 12 inches.
Yeah, I thought it was about 12. And it sticks out that far and it goes all the way up to the ceiling. And, you know, it's kind of breathtaking when you look up. It's like, wow. But now, as I'm getting older, I'm kind of wanting to maybe sheetrock it in, just box it in. I don't know why. The bricks are getting too busy for me.
You don't want to do that.
Why?
I mean, on the selling point, when you're looking at the masonry going all the way up, it just adds a
But I
lot more
put
character.
such an effort into the bottom part. I put, you know, I've got a beautiful white surround that I built with raised panels and the pilasters, the wood pilasters, the pilasters with the plinth blocks at the bottom. And
Okay.
really, really nice. And I was telling, when we had Kyle on the show, I was telling him about how I had put the granite on there, black granite, and it just looks so nice with the white, the mantle, the surround. And I had the granite put on the hearth, and then I used I want to say about 9 inches of mahogany, and so it looks like inlaid.
Okay.
It was an intense project for me to do that because my hearth is about 9 feet long, and now I'm looking at this beautiful, beautiful granite with the white surround and mahogany, and then from the top of the mantle up, it's like, it just kind
All
of,
bricks.
it clashes. It doesn't look modern. It looks, you're going from beautiful, formal fireplace to something, I don't know, Grizzly Adams. I don't, I don't know, but I always did like brick, and my wife and I, you know, we've gotten many good years out of it. So it's just in my mind, it's time for a change. You know what I mean? Just changing it for me. And you had talked earlier about also, you guys can do something out of stone. They have stone veneer that almost looks for real.
Yes, sir.
And you do that too, right?
Yes, sir. We'll come out, take a look at it. We'll show you different samples of different various veneer stone that you can choose and pick.
A lot cheaper than the real thing.
Of course it is.
And what's the advantage of the real versus the veneer? If you've already got the brick, you know, substructure, why would you want to go with the real stone and rip all that out? What would the advantage be?
Honestly, I don't see an advantage at all.
Yeah.
It's just some people prefer real stone over the veneer stone.
Because they know in their mind it's fake.
Correct.
Huh. Wow. That's when you have too much money.
That we don't have.
No, I'm just teasing. But that's, I want to touch on a little too about, and again, this is something a lot of people don't know about. I wish we had one to show you, but we don't. I don't know if everybody's familiar with what they call a flue. What's it called? A flue liner.
Flue liners.
And those are made out of
Terracotta clay.
terracotta clay, and they're usually like brownish in color, or
Yep.
tan. And how long do they come?
They come in 2-foot sections.
Those are heavy. The
Give
bigger
or
ones
take.
are heavy.
Yeah, the 1313, you're looking at probably about 50 pounds.
Yeah, I remember when the mason was having me handing them up to him, and there's different sizes for different size fireplace openings, right? In other words, I know every house that has a furnace, maybe not gas, but oil, has to have a 8x8, and that's the smallest, right?
Correct.
And that's just to vent the gas from
Well,
the...
whether you have oil heat or gas heat, you are required to put a terracotta clay liner, which is an 8x8.
Even with gas?
Unless it's power vented out the side of the house.
Power vented, because I've seen those, yes.
Yeah, if it's venting through a chimney, you need to install a terracotta clay, which is an 8x8.
What did they do in the old days before they had the terracotta?
I mean, terracotta clay
Scary.
has been around for quite some time. It's just that some builders never used them.
Yeah.
They would just leave masonry exposed brick going all the way up.
I got a good one for all you viewers out there, and you're gonna like this. You probably know the trick. I shouldn't give it away.
What's that?
I used to know a mason years ago, and he'd do a job and he'd go to get paid, and the homeowner would stiff him. You know the trick?
A piece of glass.
Piece of glass.
Fireplace.
He used to always build a chimney with a piece of glass, and then if he didn't get paid, he said, "Hey, I'll see you later." When they lit their first fire and the smoke would pour into the house, they'd call him up and say, "Hey, can you fix this thing?" And he'd say, "Well, you want to pay me, I'll fix it." They'd pay him up, he'd go drop a rock down through the thing, you're all set.
It's a myth. No one really does that.
I heard that. I didn't know how true that was. I said, that is so cool, because you could look up and still see the sky, and it's like, geez, there's nothing blocking there's nothing blocking the opening, so what's wrong? So I don't know how true that was. Maybe he just made it up.
Just make sure you always install a cap so you don't get any leaves falling in and getting stuck on the glass.
That's true too. I didn't think of that. But no, I just thought I'd lighten that up a little bit. I want to ask you. Let's see. There was you guys all. This is another thing that I've been in my house for 30 some odd years, and I've never had chimney sweep. Now, I don't burn wood anymore. I really never burnt a lot of wood. But talking to you earlier, you had mentioned even with an oil, any kind of burner that heats your home, it creates some kind of a residue on the terracotta that it will erode eventually. Why don't you explain that to me a little bit?
Well, whether it's your fireplace or your heating unit, you should make a habit of getting it inspected periodically. Reason being, even your masonry fireplace, let's say you're not using it, spider webs build webs. Spiders build spider webs.
Even in a flue?
In the fireplace flue. And you would not believe those webbings. Then after about 5-6 years, you try to light a fire, and because of the webbing, especially at the top where it's a lot cooler, will smoke out your house because the smoke will not be able to exit the flue.
No
So
kidding.
eventually it will just back puff right back into the house.
Oh, wow, that's
So you
interesting.
should definitely have it checked. As regarding the heating flue, I mean, gas is a natural burner, so it's a lot cleaner.
Yeah.
But it does require cleaning periodically. As for oil, oil has sulfur. Now, what happens with oil, when you call your heating company, they come out, they service the machine, they service the burner every year. They do not touch the venting aspect to it. They just service the machine.
From the thing back, yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
So that's where you call your local chimney sweep and make sure they're certified and licensed. Now what we do is we come out there, we clean out the furnace venting aspect of it, removing as much of the sulfur as we can, because the sulfur corrodes on the clay liner. Clay liners are only about 1 inch thick. So if you should have it cleaned out, honestly, every 2 years.
Really?
Yes, sir.
I never knew that.
Now, because if you don't, the oil will corrode on the clay liner. It's going to start withering off, collapsing, falling. That's when, I'm sure you've heard all over the news, people passing in their sleep because all the carbon's leaking right through the walls, and
Yes.
that's because the clay liner has corroded.
And after it corrodes, you have to install a certain type of a liner that you guys also do?
Yes, sir. We install the stainless steel liners. It's like a giant straw going through the cavity.
You put it together as you're putting it down?
Correct. We put it together, we drop it through the cavity of the chimney, connect it to the breach and pipework of the heating unit, and that way when the heating unit fires up, the chimney's pretty much obsolete. It's just there for structural purposes because now it's going to be vented directly into that liner, straight out into the environment.
I see. And I bet you've done a lot of those.
Quite a bit of my time.
Isn't that interesting? Well, shame on me, because I mean, it's like one of those things I say I'm going to do, and I never do it, never think about it. It's like getting my septic tank pumped. I never think of it. Just you flush the toilet, and you just don't think about maintenance on that end of it. And the chimney is another thing where people don't think about the structural aspect of it and what can happen over time. People just say, what, I can't see it. If I can't see it, it's not bothering me. And again, it's like how many times I can tell you we've taken drains apart in buildings, and the old the cast iron pipe, and they're so clogged. It might be an 8-inch, 4-inch, 6-inch main, and it's probably down to 2 inches from over the years because they didn't maintain. With the grease, putting down grease and stuff.
That's exactly what happens with fireplaces also. People say,
creosote.
Yeah, they'll just say, we burn a fire here and there, just on the weekends. It's been a couple of years. But what happens is we live in New England, so during the summer months, that creosote will soften up because of the moisture in the air and the heat, the mugginess. During the wintertime, it actually hardens up. Now, after a 2-year process of getting soft and hard, the creosote actually forms little crystals on it. That's what causes chimney fires. So even though you're just having a fire here and there, periodically, maybe on a weekend, you should have it inspected every other year.
I always used to say, what's so bad about a chimney fire? It's in the chimney. You got a fire going in there anyways. What's the difference?
But once you get that explosion going, it'll crack the clay liner, and what's behind that clay liner is some masonry, and if the masonry has any voids, there's your wood sheathing and structure part of the house.
Right. And that thing gets roaring, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Intense. One last thing I want to touch on, because again, I mean, you can talk as much as you'd like about it. Repointing. A lot of our viewers probably, maybe they've heard the term, maybe they've never heard the term before. Explain to us, if you would, Scott, what is repointing and when is it necessary to do that?
Well, what repointing is, when you look at your masonry, I mean, again, not to be repetitive, but we live in New England. It rains, it snows, it gets cold, it gets hot. Now, what happens is whenever you look at your chimney and you see voids or gaps on the mortar between the bricks, you need repointing, because what's going to happen is the rain's going to get in there, the water and moisture is going to travel inside the masonry. As it gets cold at night, it's going to harden up, freeze up, and then when it does so, it pops. And what happens is if you don't catch it early enough, you're going to have bricks popping, breaking, you're going to see bricks falling, and eventually the chimney slowly is going to start deteriorating. So you need to catch it in the early stages to prevent a bigger headache that's going to happen later on.
Wow, geez, there's got to be an easier way.
I wish there was.
It's all about maintenance.
Well,
I think I'm just going to get a condo and be done with it.
That
I'm
would definitely
telling
be a
you.
lot easier.
I'm telling you, there's always something around the house, and that's where we named the show that, around the house. But there's always something that you know. Again, you know, your fireplace, your chimney, your furnace. You've got to maintain that every so often. You should clean it, and it's no different, like you say, for the fireplace. I should say the flue. It has to be cleaned periodically. And again, I didn't know if you didn't burn wood. I always thought it was only if you burned wood.
I mean, there's preventive steps that you take with everything. If you install a cap at the top, it will stop the water coming through the flue line. It'll help, whether it's the heating unit or your fireplace, it's going to be drafting and venting better. There's also preventive measures that you can take with the masonry. You can have it weather sealed periodically every 3 to 4 years to prevent water traveling from the outside into the brickwork. It's similar to putting wax on your car. That way the water beads off and it won't penetrate the bricks.
Well, it's like when people seal their driveway.
Correct.
They're sealing the little capillaries, the little cracks. The water gets down in there and it just gets underneath and expands, and it freezes and thaws, like we talked about. So repointing, I mean, we had that. We had my mom's house years ago. I didn't do it. I hired people to reshingle the roof, you know. I said, you guys repoint chimneys while you're up there? I said, oh yeah, we repoint. I was horrified. I mean, you know, they got mortar on mortar, brick. You can hardly see the brick anymore. They just slopped it on. And that's why it's best to hire a professional that knows what, you know, you have a special tool that you use. You probably have a grinder that you clean all as much of it out as you can get that's loose.
Correct.
And then, I mean, I've seen them do it proper, and it's pretty, you know, to watch a professional do it, you get what you pay for. That's the bottom line. And there's certain things that I don't attempt because it's not something, you can't fix it. I mean, I was one time, when I was a kid, again, I was a kid, I almost fell off a roof. I was helping the mason build my chimney, and I was helping him. He said, you know, after we were done, you wash it down with muriatic acid. And I was washing it down with, my pitch on my roof is like a 12 pitch on the front of the house because it's the vaulted ceiling, you know. And I was washing it. I had one of those boards with a cleat on it hooked over the over the ridge.
The ridge hooks.
And I'm sitting on that washing it down, and there was a garden hose tied on the pipe staging, and I was spraying it down, and I went to scoot the board to slide over, and it came off the ridge, and I went down like a sled. And I was grabbing for the hose. I had the hose, but I couldn't hold on. It was